We released so much, and there were groups from Africa and Japan and China. And the evening before, in the Dead Sea, as we were consecrating the Sri Yantra into the Dead Sea to activate the Mooladhara chakra of the planet, putting the water from the Ganges on it. We had Indian women on one side and Indian men on the other, all from Kochi. So, I mean, it could not have been designed better.
We're all having so much fun.
Yeah. And after Qumran this morning, to go to the River Jordan and to get baptized, self-baptized, to initiate ourselves, as we went through the journey of stepping into the Ganges a year ago, then the step up in Powers Lake, Wisconsin, and then the step out to be in the Jordan was truly the coming of full circle, full cycle.
נורא מפריע לשמוע
מה?
שמדברים שם, זה חלק
מדברים
מהעניין.
שם. לא, לא, זה האנשים בצד.
נבקש מהם ש...
I'm sorry, it's just disturbed to hear you clear
Okay.
because
Was
this
disturbing
Oh, the men are
when,
talking there?
Yeah.
Can we nicely tell them not to talk?
yeah, to talk
But
quietly.
I can speak
Is
louder.
it
I
better
can
now?
speak louder. Yeah.
Thank you, sorry.
Yeah. So it feels so right that we drove into Jerusalem, our first entry into Jerusalem on the Shabbat as it was coming in. We saw the sunset and we went for the service, and it was a service of a reformative synagogue. So it was very inclusive. They welcomed us, and at the end of the service, the oldest person in the room actually said, "We welcome two groups. The first is the Shakti Fellowship from India and all over the world," right? The way he said it was so beautiful. We were so touched. There was another group that was churches,
Latin American.
Churches
yeah,
in
Latin American
America.
churches, and they'd all come together for this. So
Leaders of Latin
yes, churches. So the whole thing feels very special, and I could not have planned a better day for the 17th of November. Today is also the Mahasamadhi of the mother, Sri Aurobindo, who is my inspiration for this book. She's my teacher, my guru. And today is the day she left her body. And she was Jewish. And Sri Aurobindo, of course, was Indian. And there is this whole connection between the Jewish people and the Indian people and Yafa, right?
Yes.
She was telling me that Yahud and
Hodi.
are the same
Letters.
letters. So Yahud means Jewish and Hodi means Indian. Right?
Yeah.
The same exactly
Letters. So there's something between our people and these nations and these cultures, and it feels right that we have this conversation on this special day, and we have Tim Kelley from the US of A in Israel doing the audacious purpose of helping figure out Israel's purpose. I think he's a very brave man. Very brave man.
Yes.
Likes challenges.
Yeah. And the first question he gets asked is, "Are you Jewish? What's your connection to Israel? Who are you?"
What are you doing here?
Why?
Why with us?
Who are you to do this?
Yes. So on that note, welcome Tim.
Thank you.
Tim is the author of True Purpose, and we're going to get into a dialogue about that today. That's what the next hour and a bit is about. It's going to be called a Purpose Shakti Dialogue. And so we've got the two books here, and there's a body of work in each of them, I'm sure, that we're now going to discuss and find synergies. And try and figure out, why are you and I in this country at this time?
Something seems to have called us together.
Yes.
It's
I'm
not
sure-
a coincidence.
It's
I'm
not a
sure between the two of us we can at least partially figure it out.
Right. And this amazing group of very powerful, special women. So you're the only man that also makes you very special, Mr. Tim Kelley.
I cannot begin to tell you how honored and thrilled I am be the only man amidst a group of powerful female change agents.
Yes.
It's just a joy.
Yes. So this group of Shakti Leadership, I mean, we're women from literally all over the world and spanning pretty much all the continents here. We've got China, we've got USA, and I don't know what your American backgrounds are. I'm sure some of you have Polish and German, and there's some German there?
A
Kimberly?
little bit, mostly English and Irish.
Right. And Lisa?
I have the Polish.
Right.
Jak się czujesz, Bart?
That's why I look like a sister. I get to be one of your sisters.
Yes. And Manuela is Colombian and British. And we have Tammy and Efrat and Anat and Lina and Shelley,
And Yafa.
who are and Yafa,
And Lily, who's not with us.
and Nili, who's not here. But
Yeah.
that's her seat, okay? That's Nili's seat. Yes. And then we have Maria and Tatiana and Fabi, who's going to join us from Brazil. And then we have Susan.
Manhattan.
And me.
And Lena again. Yes. So you can claim to be both Jewish and American, right?
I'm a New Yorker first.
Yes.
Yes.
we have Yvonne, who's also Australian. That's your passport?
Yes, my passport's Australian.
Australian.
My parents are Malaysian.
Right.
I'm
Malaysian.
from Chinese genetics, so we say made in Australia, exported to Malaysia,
Yeah.
and then recalled back to Australia to be repackaged for the global marketplace.
Wonderful.
Perfect.
I made in Morocco.
See? Wow. Wow.
And I was made in Japan.
There you go. Born in
Yeah.
Tokyo, right?
Yeah.
How cool is that?
You can see.
You know,
So our parents
born.
were very intelligent
Yes.
from all over the world.
Yes. So I feel now that you invoke Japan and the tour group that came at Qumran this morning that was Japanese, but the one before that was African. And I feel we need to invoke the great African mother perhaps to start because she was supposed to be in a way the first Eve. So Manuela, can you briefly describe what you experienced today? What was that? What was that? What happened? Because you were overcome and you were doing your ritual and your processing and your healing work. And we all worked with you on that. But it would be nice to, I just sense we need to bring that here in order to get started on our conversation.
Today at dinner, we realized I was feeling and Maria was seeing. And so what I was feeling, Maria was seeing.
Okay.
So we had a double again.
Again.
It was the
After
second
the
time
swirl. Yes.
after the swirl we had in the Peace
Peace
Island.
Island. Yes.
And today it happened again. When the minute I have no idea. I think it was were you sitting next to me?
No, I was sitting.
You were sitting next to me. They started praying, and I just stopped breathing. I was like breathing deeply, like I couldn't feel my breath, and I was like calling in my breath. Right? You felt that, right? And that's when I started going into trance slowly. And then she started crying in the group, and that's when I really felt in all of the ancestors coming, and all of the I just felt the whole space being filled up with everybody. I don't know who everybody is, but there was a lot of people, and I felt it, and she saw it, and Maria saw it, and that's my soul left my body in a way, and it was when I started crying, I just felt that the people were crying through me. What I didn't know is that, which Maria reaffirmed, was I think there were living souls in the space.
Yes.
And
Qumran.
yeah, that there were living souls in the space that had been stuck there for a long time. And when I bowed my head down, it felt I couldn't move my body. I couldn't, I was tearing, mucus, tears, everything. And when I put my head down, light was what I felt was light shining through my crown chakra. I was opening a door for them to leave the space.
And I saw this door.
And she saw it all happen.
Wow.
And yeah.
Before she started crying, my throat blocked. And few minutes later, the Manuela started feeling bad. But I saw all the scenes before.
And to me also, the group that came after was the Europeans, the tourists. And I could hear my body, my soul, Manuela, I could hear the Europeans and then feeling the African, and just then history coming in and seeing what had happened in the planet. And so there was tears coming from me, and there was tears coming from them, and there was tears coming from everywhere. And it felt like the bigger purpose was coming through to the space. And then I felt you coming into the circle, and that's when like the polarities started crossing together, and the black and the white, and the conquerors and the slaves, and everything just started to just like coming into the circle and swirling in, and then just like leaving, and I kept just, again, like the flies were coming, and I couldn't take them out of my face, so the flies were spirits, and they just were speaking to me, and I was in complete trance, and I just couldn't feel anything. And when I came back, I mean, I feel like I'm even just telling 1/3 of the story because I don't remember. That's all I remember, but I know that there was far more that I feel like in dream time will come.
So thank you. It sounds to me as if, I mean, we hear about these things happening, you know, yogini work, priestess work across different cultures, that through their bodies they process the collective energy. Anything that was sitting, lying unhealed or stuck, they become the channel in that moment so that this energy can move through. So everything you're saying sounds right. That you know, in that moment you were the priestess, and your body was used for the transmutation and healing and for the collective, and that you had to step out of the way for it to happen, and then you came back in, and wonderful. So I think that's the perfect segue to ask Tim about, you know, she used the word purpose, and there seems to be something about the purpose of this land, which is like ground zero of humanity, right? There is the Dead Sea, which is anyway ground zero,
Yeah.
and Qumran was right there. We
I'm
were
very
overlooked,
jealous you guys all got to go to Qumran.
and we swam in the Dead Sea last evening. Yeah, so we'd finished doing all that work. Yes, Dana?
Is there any way that I could change the word humanity to the analytical mind, or the way that humans have evolved to kind of utilize consciousness to rise? Because I don't think that it was the birthplace of humanity.
Well, I don't think it was birthplace.
The
is what
ground
she meant.
zero.
I don't think
Okay.
she meant that this is
Yeah.
where we came from.
Okay.
No, I think we came from somewhere in Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I was thinking too. Okay.
No, the ground
But
zero.
there's some kind of energetic
Yeah.
Yeah.
nexus here that's
Yeah.
incredibly powerful,
Like a one.
and it's not on a single topic, like it seems
Right.
to cover a lot of different things, so, yeah.
Yeah, it's like all the archetypes are here, all of them. Because it's the desert, there is no messing around with other layers, you know. The archetypes and the laws that run them, and they run the laws, and whatever, all that is stark right here, you know. It's this big cauldron. So on that note, Tim, why don't you tell us more about your work with purpose, and then with the purpose of Israel?
I'll just say very briefly that I found my own purpose 14 years ago, after searching for it in one form or another since age 6. It was called young. And in the moment I discovered my purpose, which came to me unbidden in a flash, I realized a few things. One was that anyone could find their purpose, and a method came to me along with my own. And the instruction to transform business from a profit-driven activity to a purpose-driven activity, which I know Raj, who's co-author of your book, is called to as well. It was a few years after that one of my students in San Diego, who is an Israeli, one of the ways I do my work is I encourage people to communicate with some transpersonal source of wisdom outside of their conscious mind. And it is that informs them of their purpose. That's how I do the purpose work. So rather than choosing or creating a purpose, you actually receive it. So the method is actually quite balanced in masculine and feminine. So it's a step-by-step procedure for opening to receive something you cannot control. So this woman came to me afterwards and said, you know, my source told me to move my family back to Israel. This was in 2006. And to that you were to come to Israel in September of 2009 and lead a workshop. I said, okay, well, go fill one and I'll come. She moved her family back to Israel, filled a workshop, and I came. And it was around that same time I was having a conversation with my sources about how to change the world. So it's probably not a shock to you guys to hear that I believe that humanity is in the process of elevating itself to a new level of consciousness, and that it's a messy process. That one's taken. You can come over here. My background is in software engineering, and so I think of it like a software upgrade for humanity. And so I was asking my sources about how exactly to go about that. If I really wanted to transform the world, what was the procedure? What would I actually do? Because it's pretty big, it'd be useful to break it down into steps. And one of the things, they gave me a long to-do list, but one of them was create peace in the Middle East. And I said, great, well,
That's easy.
assuming that I wanted to take that on, what would be the sub-procedure for that? By the way, they gave me a whole bunch of institutions and countries and stuff and things like that to do, and they said that you have to resolve climate change and create peace in the Middle East. And what I understood from that, they didn't say this, but this was like an intuitive understanding, was that both of those things, that the conflict in the Middle East and climate change are training modules for humanity, that they're there for us to learn as we resolve them. And the design of the training module is that our current paradigm of thinking is all based on win-lose. Business, government, the law, sports, you name it. It's all win-lose based. And that neither climate change nor peace in the Middle East can be achieved with win-lose thinking. It's impossible to do either one. So in order to complete the training module, we have to shift to win-win thinking, right? Which is actually part of the larger project of rebalancing the forces of masculine and feminine in the world. So I said, great, so if I accept this suggested mission of, in my work we get to say no, the suggested mission of creating peace in the Middle East, how would I do that? And they said, well, you would have to find the higher purpose of Israel, the higher purpose of Islam, and it would be a really good idea to find the higher purpose of the Palestinian people as well. If you don't do that, it'll be a lot harder, but maybe still possible. And of those three, the one that was immediately available and possible was the purpose of Israel, because there were, CEOs and other powerful people in that first workshop who said, okay, we like you, we want to support you, come back. And so since then, I've been working with Israeli leaders and running workshops, and about a little over a year ago, started working more directly on the purpose of the country. And so we've had about 8 groups so far for 1 day each, a bunch of different Israelis from different walks of life. And over the course of a day, we get them to open to their own non-rational intuitive sources, download purpose information about the country, go through all the information they got together, find the most powerful purpose statements, and by the end of the day, we have them all completely 100% aligned on the purpose of the country. And the different groups get very similar information. And by the way, we've done the same thing in Colombia for several years. So we know we can do it. And now we're at the point of being ready to scale up. We're doing some crowdfunding and looking for Israeli spokespeople who would be willing to talk publicly to the media about this. Some of you read my article in Haaretz a week ago. So we're trying to get much more aggressive and public about the process. It seems like it can be used to unify Israel. Most people outside of Israel see the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians or its neighbors. Those in Israel are far more concerned about Israel's internal conflicts than they are about the external ones. And so this, to me, is a tool for unifying a country that's tearing itself apart. That's the...
So say more about why Israel.
According to my sources. Israel has a purpose to transform the world. And it may not be possible to do the humanity upgrade if Israel doesn't do its part in that. And it's interesting because I can talk to any group anywhere in the world about this and say the following things. Say, Israel has a higher purpose. That higher purpose is for the whole world, and Israel is not currently doing its purpose. And everyone does what you just did. And the Israelis here can tell you that Israelis will argue about anything. And I have gotten zero pushback on those statements. Zero. But I can do it in the US or in Europe. I can say the same thing and everyone goes, just like that. Which is a shock to the Israelis because they, as part of their religion, are taught that they're supposed to be a light to the world and to fix the world and this kind of thing. But don't understand that the rest of the world already knows that, even if they're not Jewish. That just seems to be part of the collective understanding that this is what Israel is supposed to do. And furthermore, I say to the Israelis, we're getting a little frustrated waiting for you to do your purpose. Sure.
When you refer to Israel,
Yeah.
do you mean the Jewish people
Good.
which are living, or the people on
It's a
this
great
land?
question. When working on the purpose of Israel, I stick to the country. And the reason is that if I do anything other than that, it would inspire a 3-day-long debate about what Israel means. It's not because that's necessarily the best definition. It's the one that I can get alignment on in less than 5 minutes. Still, people want to talk about it, and when I say that, they're like, yeah, he's probably right. But it's a really good question of what the edges of that are. And rather than define what the edges of Israel are, the way I say it is this. I say, well, if we were to find the purpose of the country of Israel, I am trained in collaborative decision-making, I'm also trained in hierarchical decision-making. I was a commanding officer in the Navy, but I'm trained in collaborative decision-making. And when one is trying to solve some large, gnarly problem, hierarchy doesn't work that well to get it handled. So you have to, and back to you and your buddy Raj and conscious capitalism, you have to think stakeholder-based. And so if we say, who are the stakeholders in Israel? Anyone physically living on this land, that this is their home, is instantly a stakeholder, right? Anyone who has an Israeli passport, anyone who works in an Israeli company, anyone living in a home that's within the territory of Israel is automatically a stakeholder, and that's pretty inarguable. But one could also easily say all the Jews in the diaspora are stakeholders, whether we call it Israel or not. They're for sure stakeholders in the nation of Israel. Right? If we found Israel's purpose and left them out, they would very understandably squawk about that and go, wait a minute. Right? They've been supporting Israel from the very beginning, and their hearts are here, even if they've never set foot on this land. because we have to involve many, many people in the process, we have to create public technological ways for people to participate in the process. We're starting to design an app. And once you put it on the internet, anyone can participate, right? So if somebody in China says, hey, I want to sit down for an hour and put in my 2 cents about the purpose of Israel, that's actually not a problem. Because the process is very good at scrubbing out anything that's not the purpose of Israel. So the benefit of having all those people participate is, first of all, the more people who participate, the higher quality outcome we get. And second, anyone who participates has a stake in the outcome, which means anyone who contributes to Israel purpose is likely to view Israel more favorably in the future and support it in fulfilling its purpose, and Israel could use more friends. So I'm not worried that much about who participates and who doesn't. The process isn't dependent on, as long as we have enough.
Plus, there's, I think, I'm not sure about the number, maybe Yafa knows, but I think there's close to 1 million Israelis not living in Israel, living in the diaspora. And the reason is because of what's going on here. So they're fleeing Israel. And they're Israelis. And plus, those Israelis, they really don't want to be where they are. They want to be here. But they just can't tolerate what's going on here. They just can't contain it.
So it's maybe we kind of come at it from another angle, talking about Israel. I mean, the world seems to know and sense that Israel has a purpose. So I would expand that to say, you know, most countries would also have their own unique purpose.
Absolutely.
The way I like to think of it is just like, you know, the human body is one body, but then you've got a heart, the heart has its purpose. You've got your kidneys, and the kidneys have their purpose. And each of these have to function to their full purpose for the whole body to work.
That's right.
And if you look at the planet as a body, then all the nations are like different organs.
Or like chakras.
Or chakras, yes. And for the planet and humanity to work at its full potential, all those different chakras or organs, nations, have to be playing their unique role.
Yep.
Whatever. So it's not, another way to put it is, remember you're unique and special.
That's right.
Same as everybody else.
Yep.
Right? So, in India, we are told by the Indian masters that India also has a destiny. And India's spiritual destiny is to be a light to the world, a guru to the world. On what? On unity and diversity.
Yep.
Right? Because here is a civilization unbroken, a culture unbroken for 5, 7, 10,000 years. And all different peoples, races, religions came in over time, and they tried to conquer, but they ended up simply getting absorbed. And the great stream of India kept going, right? So she's this great Ganges river in a way. You can throw anything into her, and she just keeps going. She just becomes more, right? So, in a way, human unity and harmony has been worked out in this land of India. And that can be a model for the world to learn from. So we are told in India that India also needs to get on with waking up, as you're saying, right? You know, why are you fiddling around, not getting your act together? Because the world can't move on until you wake up and then you step into your true power.
Got to do your role.
Yes. And in service of the greater evolution. So it feels like Israel also is in a similar place right now.
And Americans have always felt that we have a special destiny
Yes.
and a responsibility to the whole world.
Yes.
And exactly what form that takes has evolved at different points in our history. And right now we're a little self-absorbed. I said we. We. And
עסוקים בעצמנו.
but that is part of our DNA, right? This feeling of responsibility for elevating humanity is part of our DNA as well. And I know a lot of folks who are very powerful change agents, intelligent, thoughtful people who believe that the correct solution is to erase all the country boundaries because countries are bad, countries are old paradigm. And I disagree. that would be like saying, well, this differentiation between organs is like segregation or something. We don't want to, make this organ feel bad by keeping it separate from this other. Let's get rid of all the boundaries. It's like, well, actually, boundaries aren't necessarily bad. It depends on what you do with them. The way we're managing countries right now could probably use some improvement, but that countries exist isn't inherently a problem, from my point of view.
We were at the Jordan today for the baptism, and it was such a beautiful metaphor because literally there was Jordan and we were here, and what was the boundary is a fluid river, right? So this metaphor that if boundaries could be fluid, then they're still boundaries and yet they are flexible, right?
And if you could do a time-lapse photography of a river over a few hundred years, you would see this. Right? They don't stand still.
So looking at the fact that all these great nations are also very challenged and are stuck for whatever reason at this moment in time, and they're coming in their own way and therefore coming in the way of the greater evolution of the planet and humanity itself. In one of your talks, Tim, you talked about retiring our wounds, that our wounds have shelf lives.
Wounds have expiration dates. Yes.
So, that really resonated with me. We wake up every morning and we're so motivated to change the world or do whatever needs to be done because we are motivated by our wound.
Yes.
And there is a pain we don't want to feel, and we do anything not to touch that pain. So we go
including changing the whole world so we don't have to feel the pain of our own wound.
Yes. Yes. And
that's what's sad about the situation. I mean, if it wasn't like that, we wouldn't be here, would we? What you just said.
Say more?
Tim said that including changing the world.
That's right.
And I said that's what's so sad about it, because if it wasn't like that, we wouldn't be sitting here and talking.
That's right. So to say my version of it,
Yeah.
one day I realized that my drive to manifest my purpose was coming from my psychological wounds from childhood.
Right.
So it was manifesting my higher purpose in a wound-driven way. And I think that's true of many change agents, right? That we are psychologically predisposed to perceive some aspect of the world as a problem and try to fix it because of what happened to us when we were kids. Now, in some sense, that's a fine thing because it gets us to go out and try to fix the world. The problem is if you're trying to do it in a wound-driven way, it tends to inspire opposition and resistance from others, and you can do damage in your relentless pursuit of fixing what you perceive to be wrong with the world. And this is where we get into sort of the balancing of masculine and feminine, which is that creating heaven on earth isn't changing everything that currently exists. Some of it needs to be changed, perhaps. But there's also, that's the masculine side. The feminine side is appreciating that heaven on earth is already here and being able to see what others can't see that is fine and wonderful and blessed exactly as it is. And, as a mother does with her child, to revel in the organic evolving of heaven on earth creating itself, that I don't have to do anything other than watch it and encourage it and bless it as it shows up on its own.
Do you know who do it now? Gal Gadot, the Wonder Woman, from Israel to all over the world. This is the change by Hollywood.
Yes. So I'm going to close on that, and I'll come to Gal and the Wonder Woman story. In Shakti Leadership, one of the things I talk about is we had the hero's journey that Campbell so beautifully talks about. And he says, it's your crisis that throws you into trauma, and then you have to face your shadow, and then there is transformation. And then you have a gift as a result that you bring back the elixir to share with the world. And the question that, that begs to be asked is, do we have to grow through pain and trauma and crisis and chaos? Isn't there a conscious way to grow? So that's what I put in the book. I've called it the conscious heroic journey, right? Where instead of waiting for a crisis, how about in Shakti work, it's called Spandana. So there is this ocean of consciousness where evolution itself has a wave that rises, an impulse. It's called an evolutionary impulse, right? So when you feel you've reached a certain level of completion, invariably there will be a sense of stagnation. It now becomes easy, comfort zone, right? And it's for us to be present enough to know that this has now become too comfortable, and I have to now wait for that evolutionary impulse, which will come, and wait for it, and when that wave comes, to ride it, to say yes, and to be able to move out from that comfort zone. So take the evolutionary impulse, and then instead of having trauma, how about you submit to a dissolution?
Good. So this is the conscious surrender to the process,
Yes.
rather than trying to control it. So this is
Yes.
the feminine version.
Yes.
And I've learned to practice this because if you miss the wave,
Yes.
that's what creates the crisis.
Yes.
Right? With the,
Yes.
the bus already left the station and you're still behind,
Yes.
and now things start to go south. Right? Now comes the crisis. So it's sort of like you had the optional version. Here comes the mandatory one. So I like to catch the bus the first time it comes through because it's more fun to be on that bus than on the last bus out of the station. So I think there's real wisdom in that. And I run into this a lot with what I would call, say, doomsayer change agents, who talk about the coming disaster in which everything will fall apart, and peak oil, and how there has to be this revolution or dissolution or destruction of everything in order for us to create heaven on earth. And I say, well, we could do it that way. But I'm bidden for the first bus. Like, could we decide to change because we know it's necessary without waiting for a crisis to force it?
Yes.
Or the opposite is also to miss the good wave. I mean, that's the opposite of it, because if you're not taught, or if you're not conscious enough
Yes.
to see it,
Yes.
and you miss it,
Yeah.
then you miss the opportunity.
That's right.
It's on the same wave, same problem on the two different
Too late or too soon. Too late or too soon, both are going to cause
Yeah, if
crisis.
you try to go
Yeah.
too soon, there's
Yeah.
nothing
Right.
supporting you, and you're all
Yes.
on your personal energy, and it's
Yeah.
very hard to do it.
Yes. Yes.
And
Do you
therefore-
believe, sorry?
Sorry, go ahead.
Do you believe that the destiny, some great power on behind everything, like God, like that, make all this revolution? If He wants, it will be. If He doesn't want, it won't be. Some kind of belief, religious belief. What do you think about it? Because sometimes I think we are so small and little. What can I do? I'm only one. What can even Tim do for Israel? So I appreciate him very, very, but I see so many problems, how we can
Hurdles.
solve it.
Yeah, so
Yes, something on top of that.
Yeah.
And you speak of chakras for countries, and so I would also like to ask, like, if countries have chakras, what is the role of people in those chakras that are born into those chakras? And also, with your point, how can we collectively move that? And I'm sorry because I listened to that and I lost that question, but how can we collectively move that consciousness in that wound? How can we collectively move the wound into both of those worlds?
That's where the purpose work comes. We come back to the purpose work. When individuals find their purpose, the premise is that there is a collective purpose which is the sum total of the individual purpose, and the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Exactly.
Right? So everything comes right back to then each one finding their purpose and stepping into their dharma. And the more people who do that, that critical mass gets activated. It all does go back. The starting point is the inner peace to
So-
world peace, and then finding your dharma. Do I need to do more than just fix myself or find myself? If your dharma is to then be the leader of the greater, then to step into that level of influence. And someone else may go all the way to influencing the country. Another one may just be influencing their community.
or their family or their
Yeah.
brother.
Yeah.
And the way, one of the ways of thinking of the individual purpose is if I'm called to change the world, then it's some vast project and I'm part of a big project team. And I'll never meet everyone who's on the project team, but there are millions of people all around the world working on this project. My question then is, what's my role? Because I can't change all of it, but there's something I'm called to do, and if I don't do that, it makes it harder for the whole project. And if I do that, that's probably the greatest contribution I'll be able to make to the project. So my individual purpose is instructions for how I'm best suited to change the world, if that makes sense. So for change agents, I think it's very important work. And then like you said, say, okay, I'm called to that, start doing it. At some point it would behoove me to unhook some of the psychological impulse that's driving that, so I can do it in a cleaner way. That's sort of the advanced work.
Yeah, I like the way Andrew Harvey says it, you know, if you can't follow your bliss, follow your heartbreak. So following the heartbreak is really coming from that wound and, you know, but then, hey, let that serve you.
Well,
you
the
know,
wound is
channel it
training for the purpose, so it will
Yes.
show you the right direction to go.
till it becomes the bliss, I guess. Yeah.
If you're ready to do it.
Now here's the thing.
No, if I mean,
The-
a lot of people are afraid.
Not only are they afraid, now this is my cancer work, 10 years
Yeah.
of working with cancer patients, where I felt so clear about how I could help them fall into their purpose and their Shakti, which would heal them, right?
Right.
And yet, some of them would choose not to heal, and they would rather die. They'd
I've
rather
known some.
die. So
Even
that's
they know they.
Yes.
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 That's the sad.
So no, but that is so. The only way I could keep my sanity was to step back from saying, you know, I'm the one who has to save every life or heal every person. That, you know, there is a mystery at the end of the day, and each soul has made a choice to experience, you know, this or that. And sometimes the choice is not to heal, and that is the mystery I have to accept. I can't be invested in saying healing is good and you must heal, and you
Yeah.
know,
That's where you have to
Right?
let go.
yes.
That's then imposing my personal preference
Yes.
on their
Yeah.
choice, and it's their life.
Yes.
And furthermore, I would add to that, because there's a lot of pain and a lot of problems in the world, when I look at like babies dying too young or different things like that, and I consult my sources, they say, well, that's not your problem, Tim. There are other people who are called to deal with that. We told you what you're supposed to be doing. Don't get distracted.
Stay with this.
Which is a relief to me, because then I like, okay, I may feel sadness or pain about that, but I don't feel responsible for it, right? So it's in some ways, a relief to me know where my work is,
Yeah.
so I can worry about doing that. And someone says, well, why aren't you handling this? Or then this is, and that. I'm saying, you're absolutely right. Go get them. I'm doing this.
In Buddhism say, you know, if you see suffering around you, it comes from you. So do something. So it's not the same, but they make the person to take responsibility to the other people around him if they are suffering. If they have pain, it comes from you. Check yourself. What are you doing that they are suffering?
Yes.
It's not, you know, today to understand this idea. It's very, very, very complicated for modern people, modern life. That I know everything and I know that I'm okay. Why I'm responsible to his or to her suffer?
It's the idea of the microcosm is the same as the macrocosm. So if
Yes.
you're seeing something on the outside, there is something on the inside. And if you can fix what's on the inside, then it'll get fixed on the outside. It's easier to work on that rather than the great big hole outside.
Well, it just occurred to me that this is such a powerful and important statement, that if you find your purpose and you work toward that, that allows you then, maybe I'm speaking for myself, to not feel like you have to do everything. And it's that feeling of I have to solve everything that goes back to, Jaffa, your question about, but I'm just one person, how can I do anything? Because there's so much. And I also think it's related to what you said about fear, that for many of us, it's not so much fear of living a purpose or doing something, but fear of not being able to solve all of it. So forget it, or
Of not being enough.
not being enough, right? So forget. So I'll
Yeah.
just focus. I'll just stay very narrowly focused.
Well,
So
people
thank
have
you for
different
that.
sources of fear, you know. And some people are afraid of success. Some people are afraid of failure. And it can come from childhood, it can come from a later experience. But I think, and we all know that when we meet fear, and this is an opportunity to grow. Every time we overcome this hurdle, this fear, we grow, we learn from it. And a lot of people, and as a trainer and a coach, I know I meet it all the time, I see it all the time, I speak to people all the time who deal with this fear, and it gets them stuck. They're stuck, they won't move forward with their lives, even with small things, even with small minute things, because of paradigms from their childhood or something else that, you know, so that this fear is I always say to them, you know, it's not so simple, but it really is very simple. I always say that to them. Just make that little switch in your thinking, you know. It's so simple, you know. Just meet it and grow from it. Meet it and grow from it. It's not like, what's the worst that can happen? We're not talking life and death situation here. What's the worst that can happen? So I think that if we can all encourage other people to not be afraid of being afraid, you know, that's also
Yes.
a purpose, collective purpose.
Between that and purpose.
The other way
Huh?
of putting it is to say, develop a level of comfort with discomfort.
Exactly.
You know, one of the
With
things we do
uncertainty.
yeah,
And be okay with it.
Yeah.
You know.
it's
I
not
know-
always going to be this wonderful, harmonious, joyful. You know, it's get comfortable with a bit of
Well, especially if you're a change agent, because that means you're called to dismantle the paradigm, right? So you have to increase the level of uncertainty.
yes.
And if you're uncomfortable with uncertainty, it's going to be hard for you to do your job.
Well, this thing popped into my head, so I'm going to say it in Urdu, bringing the Muslim wisdom into this. They say in life you should have a little hillat, zillat, and killat. Okay, so hillat means you should have a little bit of sickness, you know, because that breaks the status quo and immunity is created and so on. Zillat is you should be insulted a little bit because that gets a knock on your ego and then
Yeah.
you're going to be able to go past. And killat is a little bit of tightness of budget and money
Yeah.
because
Ah.
that gets you creative and
Yeah.
puts you out of the box. So
Mhm.
hillat, zillat, killat.
I like
You
it.
know, a little bit of that is good in life. So,
Don't you get too
Yeah.
comfy.
yeah. So coming back to this, you know, that to know how to not fear and to be able to work with our discomfort.
Yeah.
There's one other thing I want to talk about, but I'm not tracking time, so
Mhm.
please let me know if there's time for this.
Yes, that
It,
is.
it would just take a few minutes, but I have a point of view on why it's going to be women's job to change the world
Mhm.
that might be interesting, but I don't know if that aligns with what you're
Please,
planning.
please, go ahead.
So I like, when I look at changing the world and upgrading the software, I like to take a long view and look back a long way. So often I look back to like how we behaved as hunter-gatherers if I want to understand human behavior. Do you want me to be louder? Is that what you're saying? Okay. So I'll look back to when we were hunter-gatherers if I want to understand human behavior, because we did that for about 1 million years before we started farming and making cities and stuff like that. And one of the things I'm tracking, because part of my mission, it seems like this is the way my sources put it, is the challenge of our generation is to rebalance the forces of masculine and feminine. That's a huge meta project that a lot of these other projects fit inside of. And before about somewhere between 5,500 and 8,000 years ago, humanity lived in a feminine dominant state, cyclical, in alignment with the seasons and the animals, migrating with the herds, not writing or keeping records. The art was almost all art of women. And then around 5,500 years ago, we shifted to a hierarchical, masculine-dominated system, which we're clearly coming to the end of. But rather than make that wrong, the way I look at it is say, well, what was true 5,500 years ago? It was a real mess. Like you could walk out of your door and get, run over by a passing tribe or eaten by an animal. And so we can fly from all over the world and gather together here because of the planes and the computers and the phones and the various things that masculine culture ultimately created. At the end of it, it's easy to see the bugs in the system and say, I don't like this version of the operating system anymore. It's too oppressive to women, and there's all this concentration of wealth and these huge hierarchies and all this other kind of stuff that sort of it eventually played out to its illogical extreme. And now we have this interesting challenge of bringing it back into balance. And so in a way, we men have really been working at it for a long time here and trying to make things better in ways that made sense to us. And there are a lot of men, myself included, who are trying to take things to the next level, but because the thing that's most needed is the addition of more feminine leadership, there's only so much we can do. And I say feminine leadership very specifically rather than female leadership, because in my view, most female leaders are actually enacting masculine leadership, which in itself is not a problem either. But the thing that's missing is feminine leadership, right? And one of the things I love about Nilima, and when I walked in, sat down, she said, well, we're going to have a conversation. I just can't wait to see what arises organically. I want to hear what it's about. So she created a little womb for us here. A few seeds, a little water, little incense, and then to see and then marvel at what organically grows. So what we're seeing here is a very self-confident, self-aware. Actually, most of the women I know who practice real feminine leadership don't know they're doing it. Right? She's actually quite rare in that she's highly conscious that she's practicing feminine leadership. And so this is a really good role model, and you're wise to follow her and take her programs and stick around her so it rubs off. I spent a lot of time in workshops hanging out, learning from women so that I could bring my masculine and feminine back into balance, right? My masculine and feminine back into balance is not 50-50, as you can probably tell, right? But it's it's different than where it was. So I just want to really honor that about you.
Thank you. No, we have some amazing yoginis right here in the room.
Absolutely, I don't doubt it.
Yes.
But do you know what I'm talking about? The practices and behaviors of feminine leadership are highly unconscious in our culture.
Yeah.
And we made a decision collectively, men and women, over 5,000 years ago to make that sacrifice so that we could be here now and do this.
Wow.
And now it's time.
You know the story on Ryan Eisler's book, The Chalice and the Blade?
I do. I had some lovely chats with her about it and helped her with some internal work I can't go into detail about.
No, so you're right. The pendulum was this way and then it's gone that way. And finally we've arrived in our evolution where we can find that inner balance regardless of gender.
That's right.
So,
as opposed to the oversimplified feminine good, masculine bad,
Yes.
to replace the masculine good, feminine bad that we were doing before, right?
Yes.
It's drawing in the new paradigm in crayon, right?
So talking about the purpose of Israel, coming back to that, what is your sense, Tim? What is the purpose of Israel?
So when we work with these groups, they keep coming up with the same information. Every group has an argument about two things, which the Hebrew speakers in the audience will immediately recognize. Or la goyim, which is light to the goyim, to the non-Jews, to the nations. They usually say light to the nations, but as far as I can tell, that's not what goyim means. And tikkun olam, which means to fix the world. Both of those come from the Torah. They're very old, and they're written in the context of this is the purpose of Israel. That's what it basically says. So whenever we get a group of Israelis together and start working on the purpose of Israel, eventually this comes out of somebody's mouths and starts a debate. Because people are really uncomfortable with those statements. They sound arrogant. Now, what I know from working with thousands of people's purposes is that a good purpose statement always sounds arrogant. And the more arrogant it sounds to the person whose purpose it is, the more likely it is to be accurate. And so,
And happen.
yeah. And so that's not always the answer the group aligns on, but it always passes through that door on the way there. Statements we often get are things like to elevate the energy or elevate the consciousness of humanity, to spread positive values, moral values to the world, to be a model of what a society could be. And in one case, and this was a colleague of mine, also not Jewish, at the Western Wall, the wall told him to be a model of forgiveness to the world. And so it's stuff in that ballpark. And the work we've done in Colombia is totally different. The groups there all get the same stuff as each other, completely different from what the Israelis get. And so it seems to be stuff like that. And anyone who hears that stuff, usually there's some kind of physical or emotional impact from it, which some of you could feel when I was saying it. And just sort of this sense of, yeah, that sounds true. And the different groups word it slightly differently, but it's all stuff like that. And just let me just say, from my point of view, that's the responsibility of Israel and apparently of the Jews as well. And that's no different than any of us here who are called to change the world. It doesn't make us better, it doesn't make us worse, it makes us more responsible. Right? If the universe places a mission on your shoulders and says, great, you're supposed to go change the world in the following way. Doesn't make you better or worse, gives you more work to do. So Israel's got a lot of work to do.
It's a responsibility rather than a privilege.
That's right. Well, I mean, I feel privileged, but I don't feel privileged like I get to, dictate. In fact, I'm very careful about, because I see other change agents do this sometimes, like, I'm more conscious than they are. And I think, well, actually, that's kind of a contradiction. If you're behaving that way, you're probably not. So I feel like everyone here is God taken human form. So who am I to, I'm trying to make a win-win world. That means everybody. We're all stakeholders.
From your familiar with Israelis, can you see the differences between the point of view of women and men? And do you think the women can lead this mission more than
Ask
men?
Golda.
It's a good question.
No, Golda wasn't.
It's a very good question. So a lot of the work I do is with organizations, finding the higher purpose of companies, where they want to inspire their employees, inspire their customers, or they're just subscribed to conscious capitalism and they just want to have a purpose. In Israel in particular, not so much in the US or Europe, in Israel in particular, there's a greater tendency in my experience of the men, male business leaders specifically, to resolutely believe that it's only about the money. And that anything that doesn't align with that belief is basically confused and idealistic. And so that it's this sort of, and it's not all of them, but it's just a higher percentage among the men and the women, this kind of entrenched cynicism about that this is what matters, and that's what's practical, and that's what's real, and everything else is a bunch of bullshit. Higher percentage, not everybody.
Once you identify the purpose,
Mm-hmm.
do you feel that there is a path or a project or a next step being built?
Yeah. So the next step for an organization or a person or a country is to ask oneself, how aligned am I currently with this purpose? Am I on purpose? Am I off purpose? Like, where am I? If this is the path, how close to it am I going? That's one. And the other is, do I want to? That's a very important question a lot of people forget to ask. If you don't feel like doing your purpose, you're not going to get very far. And I'm a big fan of free will, right? Want to? Don't want to. If you don't want to, it's easy. You're done. Check. all set. If you do want to, then you have more work to do. If you do want to, then the question is, what do I need to do to bring what I'm doing more in alignment with that purpose? How do I need to be to bring how I'm being more in alignment with that purpose? And to really make it work, particularly for an organization or a country, you have to basically take each area and look at it and say, well, education, government, the military, medicine, like look at each piece, each aspect of the country and say, how do we make healthcare more aligned with our purpose? How do we make the military more aligned with our purpose? How do we make our, civil service, whatever it is, doesn't matter, right? The way we name our roads, how do we make it more aligned with our purpose? And that makes it something everyone can engage in and contribute to, and that makes it more likely to be successful, because you don't want to be waiting for the leaders to let you know what the plan is for finding the purpose. Relying on our leaders has proven unreliable of late. So, so that becomes something anyone and everyone can and should do. Am I behaving in accordance with the nation's purpose or not? How could I do it better? How could my family do it better? Does that make sense? So in a company, we usually do it like department by department.
Yeah.
Right?
Tim, you mentioned that you realized that would mean Israel and Jews and Palestinians. Has your work extended beyond
So with
the
Islam and the
Israelis yet?
Palestinians, I've made several forays, several attempts. Each time it fizzles out very quickly. And the messages I get is it's not time yet. Timing is a big thing. And this is one of the beliefs I operate as a change agent, is that timing's really important. And like you said, if you try to go too soon or too late, it's much harder. So people ask me, why aren't you trying to find the purpose of the U.S.? Simple answer, too soon.
How do you measure that time?
Well, the short answer is I ask my inner guidance system for guidance about it. But there's also signs and symptoms. And I also make periodic attempts to test it, right? So I have a Palestinian buddy who lives near San Francisco, who is a client of mine. She's all purposed up and connected to her sources and everything now. Her mom was like one of Yasser Arafat's closest advisors, so she knows all the Palestinians, right? And so she introduces me to some Palestinians in the US and stuff who are change agents like her, who aren't just bitter trying to kill the Jews, who are actually trying to do something useful about the situation. And so when she offers someone up, I go meet with them and see if I can get something to happen. And if after 2 or 3 meetings it all kind of goes, then I know I was right. It wasn't time yet. Right?
How long have you tried that?
What's that?
How long have you tried talking to Palestinians?
5 years maybe, something like that. But not all the time. Just once in a while when an opportunity pops up, I just sort of check it and see.
Do you have a hunch of when they...
Yeah.
No.
Time's wasted.
No.
I mean, it's a good question.
No, because of your work. I'm asking seriously.
Yeah.
Do you have a hunch of when it will be ripe?
It's warming up now. There's
When
more action.
Both sides will be ripe.
Oh, no, that's a really good question. So the information I get is that both sides have to do a bunch of internal work first before trying to do anything together.
Right.
And that a lot of the efforts to try to bridge things and bring them together is honestly premature.
Right.
That neither side is in an internal state that would permit an agreement or a peace to exist.
Right.
And so both sides have to transform. It's sort of like marriage counseling. You have to do some separate work too to kind of get in a state where it's possible to,
Or live separately.
like that.
I'm kidding.
I mean, we're doing a trial separation now with the Palestinians, right?
Yeah, I was just kidding, I know.
So I don't know. I suspect it's on a scale of years, not decades, but probably not weeks or months.
In your conversations with these Palestinians, have you got a sense of what they think their purpose is, or have you felt
The Palestinian people, not a clue. No, haven't got that far with them. And I've also talked to a few imams and tried that a few times to go after Islam. And even with the ones who are relatively open to it, I can't get any traction. I can't get anything to happen. So it's like, all right, okay.
You had mentioned that that Israel needs to find, I will put it in my words, its inner peace. prior to go and change the world. How do you see?
Yes and no, and this is a belief I have about purpose, is that there's two ways of screwing it up once you learn your purpose. One is you say, well, it would be way too arrogant of me to do my purpose with anybody else until I've completely healed and transformed myself. Right? I need to do that first, because otherwise I'd be out of integrity offering myself as a healer or a teacher to someone else when I'm not fixed yet. So now I'm going to work on myself until I've got myself perfected before I go help anybody else. And that to me, that doesn't work, because that way delays the amount of time before you actually get to do anything useful with anybody else. The other one is to say, oh, I'm fine, I'm good, I'm all healed, transformed, and enlightened. It's them that need to be fixed, right? Now you're a real hazard to people, right? So my experience is that I'm always a work in progress, and so are the people I'm working with. And it actually helps me keep humble. We're on the same path. I might be 3 or 4 steps ahead of them, but I'm not done. And so, I only have to be 2 or 3 steps ahead of them to be able to lead them. I don't have to be miles ahead. In fact, if I were miles ahead, they might not be able to see me. And so that's my point of view about it.
Lena, you've been having your hand up a long time.
Yeah, I have to speak. Okay, so there's, you said Tikkun Olam.
I did.
I'm speaking to all Israelis in the room because this is really something that I've been carrying for a long time. Tikkun was told to me by an Israeli that Tikkun is the order of life.
Mm-hmm.
And she's a diver and she works with the ocean. And she says that the only place that she's ever seen the Tikkun is in the ocean, where all of the fish, they only eat what they need, they only go for these fish, and these fish go for these fish, and these fish. So there's literally a perfect order that exists in the ocean that we don't have on the planet. I don't know why I'm asking this, but I feel so called to speak to it that I just have to. The way that I also see it is that all of the fish also, because the ocean is so deep and wide and the breath is so expansive, that each of the fish move in their own vibration, let's just say. So how can we see that on a flat surface, that we actually are all on different vibrations, but we also are the same height? So how do we explain that even if we're moving, and how do we bring order to a space that there's
limited space,
right, or that our work is that there's no difference, we're all operating on one vibration at the same time? Or how do you expand that, or expand? Now that I'm speaking it, I actually don't know what I'm trying to say, but I think that there's this real thing of the tikkun. That's something that the Jews, it's the order. And it's, how do you create, I don't know.
It's a good question. I don't think you do it by making everyone the same in any respect, right? That everyone has to believe the same or be at the same level of consciousness or the same vibration, or we all have to, all attempts to do that in the past have ended really badly. So I don't think that works. There's also the issue of limitations, like in a 2-dimensional limited sphere, there's only so much space also, and so many resources. And that tends to inspire people to scarcity and win-lose thinking and conflict.
We're in a 3-dimensional space.
I understand, but we're living on the surface of a 2-dimensional one. But I don't want to get into the geometry with you. The words that I use and I hear others use to describe what I would call the new paradigm are, I call it collaboration or win-win thinking. I hear other people use the term a world that works for everyone. And because we're all so trained in win-lose thinking, we're unable to conceive of how that might work as a collective. Some individuals are, but collectively as a society, we're really poorly equipped to envision that. The systems that I use to create that, which also are a balance of, structure and organic and masculine and feminine, are where you gather all the stakeholders together with the explicit intention of creating a win-win solution in a situation where no one can see one, and in often cases some people don't believe it's possible. And that final solution would be unanimously approved by all the stakeholders. That's the goal. That's how you know it works for everybody, is everybody can't think of anything better. And if you do that, then people come up with solutions that no one could have thought of alone, that are far better than the old system. And no matter how intelligent an individual was or hierarchy was, they wouldn't have been able to come up with that either. So I don't know what that solution looks like. I have a sense of what kind of process will have to be used to find it. And a belief that that solution exists. And that once we find it, we'll then then we'll be motivated to perfect it further. Right?
I feel I need to mention, we talk about the idea of the seed and the soil, right? We're focusing only on the seed, and we're forgetting that there is also a soil, that everything exists in its medium, its context. There is a Shakti field. There is a field of consciousness, which is powerful and which is intelligent and which is evolving at its own pace and rate and direction as well. So all of us are not evolving in isolation. All of us at different levels of consciousness are also we're like all boats on the same ocean. So there will be a rising tide that will lift all boats as well. So to not discount that there is a third or X force, which is also at work, and that is the Shakti intelligence. And what each of us can do is get in touch with that unique vibration in us and align with that.
Yep.
And if each of us just does that, regardless of what level of consciousness or readiness they are at, that they are in touch with the ocean, so to speak. Right?
Well,
so it's happening at a consciousness level. The ocean is now at an energetic level rather than a physical water medium level, in which all of us are existing. Right?
But I think my question is how, because we all are so fixated on the fact that we're 70% water, our emotions are this or that and the other thing. But I think what we're really also looking for is that we're so steeped in the feminine. We know the feminine, we love the feminine, we embrace the feminine, we are the feminine, blah. But how do we actually utilize the air, the healthy masculine? Like how do we really utilize that consciousness, that the air is so subtle and it can be so quiet, but the air is, I think we're coming to a point where we know the water, we know the emotions, we're trying to move past the wounding. And how do we grasp the consciousness and the air and the healthy masculine?
I can tell you how I do it, which is, and it's related to what she was just saying, which is that I'm not just trying to change the world is already trying to change.
Yes.
And so I'm here to help. It's more like a midwifing process than a construction project. So as a result of that, part of the reason why I'm so rigorous about consulting with my sources and checking timing and doing all this stuff to figure out where I should be putting my time and energy, I'm a pretty masculine vehicle, right? It's not pretty obvious. I'm working, taking action, and using personal will to try to cause specific changes in reality. This is how the masculine works, right? Now I'm doing it in a vision and purpose-based way. That's the sort of more divine masculine as opposed to a fear and control-based way, which would be more psychological masculine, the womb-driven masculine. But I know that I'm partnering with larger forces that are already flowing in that direction.
Yeah.
And so people will watch me work and say, well, how could you have produced that outcome, Tim? That makes no sense. The outcome you produced was completely disproportionate to your skill, your training, your intelligence, and the amount of effort you put into it. What the fuck?
Sounds familiar.
And the answer is I cheated because I was partnering with larger forces, therefore all my behavior and my actions were massively amplified because it wasn't just me. And the way my sources put it, and this is a vision of someone whom I have transformed. They're saying, okay, your job, Tim, is to transform leaders, and this was a description of how they work after I'm done with them, which of course also applies to my transformation of myself. They said, he'll move his hand and move mountains. And people will argue and say, look, he moved his hand and the mountain moved. He caused the mountain to move. And someone else will say, no. He knew the mountain was going to move, so he moved his hand to make it look like he moved the mountain. And someone else will say, no, it was just a coincidence. His hand and the mountain moved at the same time. And they said, none of those are true. What's true is that his hand and the mountain were moved by the same thing. Right. So, am I answering your question? Okay. So I do believe there's a role for will, and I believe there's a role for action.
Right.
The trick is, can I do that in a way where my egoic personal desire is coupled and aligned and partnered with the larger forces that are already headed in that direction, not trying to eradicate myself in the process. I'm a fully active, willful, egoic, self-interested, choiceful individual who decided to do the exact same thing that the larger force is doing, because I like that better than the other option.
And Lina, this is what this entire work is. The whole Shakti leadership model is to first cultivate presence. So above all, we are yoginis, whether we like it or not. We are practicing self-mastery. We are practicing selfless service of a higher purpose. We are practicing in each moment. That is what the work really is. To be a Shakti leader is to be in service of what is asked of us in that moment. And that's the only thing, one breath at a time, one step at a time, one choice at a time. And that takes work and practice. You want a fit belly, you go to the gym and you work your belly muscles. Well, you want to get this, you've got to put in the work of mastery, of that's your consciousness being cultivated.
And just to reiterate what I was saying before, the work of the learning to use the will in the masculine is available many, many, many places in our society. And many of you have already done that and mastered it. And this work is the work that's available almost nowhere, right? This is the thing that's the balancing force that's so hard to find, is the conscious feminine power that knows how to open to receive what wants to happen instead of trying to control it. Right? That's
I also think that there is, the higher mastery that you do and process, and each time you grow a step and another step and another step in terms of water and air, masculinity and femininity, is also to know when and how and where and in what situation and in front of who to use the water and the air at a certain time, in a certain situation, in a specific moment, and what's the right thing to do. And you can fine-tune it within time, the more mastering you do. And I think you need both. You need both. It depends on the situation. It depends on who's in front of you.
Yeah.
So that's how I see it.
Can I add a question of that? What about the identity and to belong to some? Is it disturb the purpose, or I create the purpose and then the purpose will tell who I am? If I have so many problems with my identity, I don't belong to this and I don't belong to that, and I just that search about my who I am in this world. And
Am I Jewish? Am I Palestinian?
yes,
am I
and
American?
I'm a
Am I New
Moroccan,
Yorker?
and I'm writer,
Yeah,
and I am woman, and I am just mother, and and all this. If I make the purpose, as you say, is it make more strong identity or more belonging to the place that I live?
It's a good question. So let me say that when I started this work, I didn't have a tribe like this one, and my experience was that I didn't fit in anywhere. So I did consciousness workshops. I was a commanding officer in the Navy, and I was a leader at Oracle Corporation. And I felt like I had 3 identities for these 3 different lives, and I couldn't bring my full self to any of them without confusing the hell out of the people in that particular realm. Finding my purpose did help me with that, and it made my identity both stronger and weaker. The way it made it stronger was it answered a lot of questions I'd been carrying since I was very young that were confusing me and kind of eroding my sense of identity and interfering with my sense of belonging. Once I knew who I was because I knew my purpose, then I could find tribes that I fit with. Some of the people in whom had almost nothing else to do with me whatsoever. Like, it was shocking how different they were from me and how easily we got along because we'd both done a particular piece of work, right? My wife is that way, right? She teaches consciousness work for women, teaching them to love themselves through embodiment using dance. Right? And she and I met in a consciousness workshop, and I was like a manager and director of software programmers at the time, and she was teaching aerobics at the Y, right? So couldn't have been, much more different and both be living in the same area. And so in that sense, it made my identity stronger. My sense of who I was sort of settled in a way that it hadn't before. There was this kind of divine agitation before that. The way in which it made it weaker is I find that doing more and more consciousness work makes my ego less rigid and fuzzier around the edges and not as concerned about the boundary between me and everything else. If someone says, well, are you this or are you not that or whatever? Say, yeah, whatever. So, because that's a feature I find of people who've done a lot of work on themselves, particularly shadow work, is that their egos have an easier time around the edges, not trying to hold on to their sense of identity really tightly. So I think it made my sense of identity stronger and weaker, and I appreciate both.
Also.
I'm aware we've passed time, so I would like to maybe just wrap. I'm just thinking how this was such a wide-ranging conversation. Maybe each one of us needs to arrive at a so what and a key takeaway for themselves rather than say this is the one for the group, So maybe just take a moment, everyone, and quiet and drop in. And just go over I'll hold space, silence for maybe 30 seconds to a minute. Drop in and allow the key ideas, ahas, to rise up for you. The so what of this 1.5 hour that we spent together. What is the key insight that serves you and your purpose and where you are today? Let it come for you now. And if there is a one word call out that will embed it for you, I invite you to call out. We can begin with Yvonne maybe and then just go towards the rest of the circle. One word that sums up your learning for today. Take away.
Growth.
I'm looking it up in English.
Betsy?
Willing.
Easy joy.
Lisa?
Downstream.
Manuela?
Inspiring.
Yeah.
I think open minds.
Open. Efrat?
Timing.
Shelley?
Cooperation.
Collaboration.
Cooperation.
Cooperation.
Collaboration is
Rukmini,
Trust.
Tati,
division.
division. Leda,
One word. It's more of the concept of that growth is always a process and that there's no moment where you'll be ready to step in.
process. It's
Process.
Bobby,
Blossom.
Maria,
Authenticity.
authenticity. Aina,
Sources? Question mark.
Susan,
Maybe S factor.
X factor.
X factor.
I'll go with revision.
Revision. I'll go with momentum.
What's the revision?
Revision is shinui.
I'd go with stages.
I should have written them all.
So on that note, Tim, any last one line, something for us to take away? And
I wouldn't want to add any more content. I really honor you for the work that you're doing. I'm glad to be on the Change the World team with you, and I wish you well.
thank you.
Happy to have you on board.
Yeah.
Enjoy.
Thank you. You've been kind enough to give some of us your book, so we're happy to also share that around.
The rest of us will buy it.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And we've got these you can take with you. This is the next Shakti Fellowship begins in June next year. And it'll be in India. We go up to the Ladakh mountains
In June?
in June. And then I think we're going to Rumi Shrine in October.
I am. Where?
To Konya.
Awesome.
To?
Konya, Rumi.
I assume I'm not eligible, but I do know some powerful women. I invited a bunch of them, and I managed to bring 2.
You are eligible.
I'm eligible?
Wow.
Yeah,
Really?
Wow, okay.
It's
Cool.
about the family,
Okay, good.
not about
I will
the
go check with
female.
my sources.
That was an important.
It's built for women and a few special.
And a few good men.
Yeah.
You know, I've got to say thank you so much, and thank you to all of the men that are working consciously. They seem to be coming more and more, at least into my life, and I hope that's starting to happen to other women in this room. And I just thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Do not be seduced by the limiting belief that conscious men don't exist.
Like I said, they're coming now and more. It's wonderful. Fabulous.
We don't want the world without you. We want the world together.
We can't.
Let's give him a group hug.
Perfect mix.